Ah, much better. Hello there. Come in. Sit down and join me. I wasn't expecting anyone so late. You see, I'm recording this in the middle of the night. We have this stormy weather. Yeah, it's mid-October, so it's dark and cold. And you can hear the wind outside. And it's been rainy. Yeah. But you know what they say, right? It can't rain all the time. Yes. So by now, some of you already know what we are going to talk about in today's episode. And you guys know I always say, I have something very special to show you guys. Well, that has never been more true than today, because this will probably be a very different kind of video and probably the most challenging review I have done here on the Vagabond Arashikage channel. Why? Because there's just so much stuff to talk about. And you're like, yeah, but what are we going to do? I will tell you. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time. I just haven't been sure how to approach it. Okay, without further ado, guys, in today's episode, we are going to talk about, you guessed it, The Crow. Not the movie, but the comic book. So this is The Crow by James O'Barr. Okay. I don't even know where to start with this one. Because, as I mentioned, I wanted to do this for a long time, but, I wasn't sure how. There are a lot of stuff that we are going to talk about, and I thought it would be fitting to do this for Halloween. So, this is it. Don't get scared now. I will do my best to try to cover all the stuff and try not to forget anything important. Now, this comic book here, let me just start by saying this is one of the best comic books I have read in my entire life. I would put this top 3. And I've read a lot of comic books. Now, this is unlike anything else I have read. And I would say this is a masterpiece. This is pure art. It's brilliant. And it's something else. There's nothing else quite like this. Yeah. Where do we start? I think for me to be able to talk to you guys about the comic book and for us to go into the comic book, we actually have to start with a story behind the comic book. So, as I said, this is a comic book by James O'Barr. And James O'Barr wrote and illustrated The Crow. Now, a lot of times you have some creator or writer coming up with something like some cool idea coming from a happy place, some very optimistic inspiration. That is not the case with The Crow. The Crow is one person's torture and torment and agony and sorrow just transformed into this comic book right here. Yeah. And you're probably like, what the hell are you talking about, KH? Well, as I said, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. So bear with me. James O'Barr. Now, James O'Barr was born in 1960. And he was an orphan. And he grew up in the Detroit foster care system. And when James O'Barr was 18 years old, he had a fiancée named Beverly. And James hadn't paid the insurance on his car, and he was afraid the police might recognize his car and that he would get a fine. So he calls and asks his fiancée to come pick him up. And on her way to her car, Beverly gets hit by a drunken driver and dies. So he loses his fiancée to a drunken driver, and this changes his life forever. I mean, this is also like he was pretty young, so that had a huge impact. And later, he enlists, like, having no purpose in life. He said a lot of this himself. Like, all the light was snuffed out of his life. He didn't have any meaning anymore, and he enlists the Marines. And in 1981, James O'Barr is stationed in Germany, and he's creating these combat manuals for the military. And this is when he decides that he has to do something. He has to find a way to process and try to get some catharsis, to try to get some closure, and he starts working on The Crow. So everything here is hand-drawn. It's a black and white comic book. There's nothing digital involved in making this, and the art style is amazing. It's very detailed, and you can see he put his entire soul into this. This is something very personal. And he also said, like, in interviews, that he didn't care if this would never even see the light of day. If this was not to be published, it wouldn't matter to him. He was doing this for himself. Yeah, you see, this is what we are doing today. Now, so this was 1981, and he worked on the comic book for many years. And he comes back to Detroit, and it's not until 1989 that this gets published for the first time. So when it was published, it was supposed to be there are 5 issues, but only the first 4 got published in 1989. And the publisher then was Caliber Press, or Caliber Comics. And Caliber Comics was like a publication studio based in a comic book shop. And this version that I have here is the special edition. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the first time it was published, only 4 of the 5 issues got published. And then in 1992, the 5th and final issue of the comic book got published by Tundra Comics. And every issue, every chapter had a name. So the first one is Pain, then it's Pain, Fear, Irony, and Despair. Those are the first 4, and the 5th one is Death. And these are the themes of those issues. And as I said, this is a piece of art. This comic book has poems. It has a lot of influence from all sorts of different media, and also James O'Barr was a huge fan of Joy Division, and there are quotes from Joy Division and The Cure in this. And yeah, as I said, it's very different. It's got this poetic style. The character, everything is very different than anything else I have read. Yeah. So I was going to come to this version that I have here. Came out in 2011, and this is called like the special edition or the author's edition. And what happened is that he went back and included a lot of extra stuff in this, and he even worked some of the old chapters. And it's not like George Lucas and Star Wars. James O'Barr has said that all the stuff that is in this version here was always meant to be there. Some of the stuff he couldn't do back then, both because the way they were printing, there wasn't enough space, and some of the stuff he said he couldn't technically do. And yeah, throughout the comic book, he really evolves, and his style, he uses a lot of different techniques, and his style improves very much throughout the comic book as well. And yeah, some of the stuff he couldn't technically get right, and in this version, I think we have 60 pages that were not released until this version. There's some side chapters and some like other things included as well, and we have more extended scenes, and we have some flashback scenes here that were not included originally, and all the flashback scenes are actual memories and actual things that, yeah, based on memories between him and his fiancée Beverly. So he put everything in here. And so there was some stuff he just that he wasn't ready to get it into the comic book, but he had a lot of sketches, and some stuff he lost over the years, and he had to kind of draw from memory. Yeah, so I think it's time for us to start to talk about the story. Okay. Yes. So this is the complete version, and the story of the Crow is it's a revenge story. It's partly he wrote this, as he has said, like he put a lot of his anger and hatred into this, and this would like be the justice that he could not get. And another thing that inspired this comic book was a murder in Detroit where a couple got killed over a $20 engagement ring. So this comic book is about a young couple, Eric and Shelley, and they are gonna get married, and the day before Halloween they get murdered by this Detroit street gang. And 1 year later, Eric gets revived by this crow, and in the movie the crow is like a physical crow, but here it's only Eric who can hear and talk. He talks occasionally to the crow, so it's like a spiritual being that connects with him and is like a guide for him from this state of limbo. And yeah, so he starts this quest for vengeance, and he's out to kill the 5 or all the people who were involved in their murder. Mostly he's out to get these 5 bad guys: Tom Tom, Tintin, Top Dollar, Fun Boy, and what's the last one? T-Bird. So the main antagonist in the comic book and in the movie are also kind of, they've swapped some things. There are some changes, but I think doesn't matter, because the movie is also amazing. So I think if you like the movie, you're definitely going to enjoy this. And if you haven't watched the movie and you've only read the comic book, I would say the movie's absolutely worth your time. Yeah, so he starts like working his way through these really, really bad guys. You don't get much sympathy for these guys. They are terrible human beings. And in the movie, it's more straightforward and like he just kills one guy after the next. But here, the story is not linear. As I said, you have these flashback scenes, and you have some stuff like very dreamlike part where he sees this horse caught in barbed wire. Yeah, and he uses very different technique in style for the flashback scenes. So yeah, the art style is amazing. I love it. And I have like, I've read it twice now, and the second time I have discovered so many more details and so much stuff that I didn't like notice the first time. The next time I'm reading this, I'm probably going to discover even more things that I missed. Yeah. Now, so that's the story, and I want to also mention the design and how the crow Eric looks in this. When I read this, I was like, the crow, he reminds me of Dream from Sandman. And then I kind of thought, okay, so maybe Neil Gaiman or maybe James O'Barr based it on like Sandman, or the other way around. Sandman came out in 1990, so it's so close that I wasn't sure like who was influenced by whom. And then I kind of read up on it, and James O'Barr based The Crow and his visual, like this, like how he looks. The face is basically Peter Murphy from the band Bauhaus, and the body, he didn't want like a bulky superhero physique on the Crow, so he wanted something more lean and wiry. So the model for his body and his movements is actually Iggy Pop. And then I checked like Dream and Sandman, and it turns out Neil Gaiman also based Dream on Peter Murphy. So that was just a funny little coincidence. Yeah, and yeah, as I also mentioned, it's dark, it's gritty, it has that 80s feeling, that post-punk, dark wave, goth feeling. Yeah, and it makes sense when Joy Division and Cure and Bauhaus and all these bands are like bands that James O'Barr listened to. And when we're talking about, again, the movie and the comic book, the soundtrack for the movie is amazing. Yeah, I could probably make a 3-hour video. I'm gonna try to just keep it very precise and not waste too much time. So that's the character. Yeah. What else should I mention? Yeah. Now, James O'Barr didn't get any closure or healing out of this, so he said himself that if anything, he was just he was focusing on all the negative and all the anger and hatred, that he was worse off when he finished this comic book than before. And there is, spoiler alert and all that stuff, you also see that Eric's character, the Crow, he doesn't change throughout the comic book. If anything, he becomes almost more violent and more brutal. At least the final chapter, Death, the way he goes through some of these bad guys is just so dark and brutal. Yeah. So I don't know if that's like also because James O'Barr wasn't getting the closure he wanted. So there's this, I'm going to read this final part here. So after, because, okay, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit more. You see, he didn't feel he got any better after he finished this. If anything, he felt worse and was more self-destructive. And James O'Barr was also connected to the production of the movie, he was on set. He knew Brandon Lee, and he had a lot of guilt both over what happened to his fiancee Beverly and also the death of Brandon Lee, because The Crow is just filled with tragedy. So the movie is also remembered for what happened to Brandon Lee. He died during the production of the movie and there was this accident that led to Brandon Lee's death, and James O'Barr had a lot of guilt over that as well, because he was like, if I hadn't made the comic book, then that would not have happened either. And it was not until Brandon, and here's also another weird thing, is that like the characters Eric and Shelley were gonna get married, and also Brandon Lee and his fiancee, they were gonna get married after the production of The Crow, and I think the movie was almost finished. They were like a week or two or something like that from completing shooting the movie, and then that accident happens. So it was Brandon Lee's fiancee that helped James O'Barr with a lot of healing and how to actually go through his grieving properly and how to let go of the guilt, how to not blame himself. And there's this extra chapter in the special edition also, after all the revenge and all the killing, the Crow and Eric the Crow character, they are in this wood, and it's a very dreamlike sequence. And because he talks to the Crow now and then, the Crow comes and says something, and then the Crow goes away. And here, the Crow is sitting on his shoulder, and the Crow says, I've watched you dump buckets of bullets into these guys, slit throats, cut limbs off. That last guy you beat to death with a hammer. Yeah, as I said, spoiler alert, we're way past that. I don't want to spoil anything, but this is just something I thought would be nice to include. So, yeah. And the Crow continues, I'll admit we had fun, but to what end? And Eric replies, the last act is bloody, no matter how fine the play. Yes, yes, yes. But you're still here. I see that. The resolution isn't about justice or revenge. It's about forgiveness. And then Eric says, are you mad? I could never forgive them. Not them, you idiot. Yourself. You couldn't save her, Eric. I should have. There was nothing to be done, boy. If you want to leave this in-between place, you have to let it go. And then the Crow replies, stupid bird. So yeah. So that is really, that's something else. Okay, I don't really think there's anything more I can say about this, except for read it. Get hold of this comic book and check it out. It's worth your time. If you're looking for something really well written, just something different, and I think also it's a comic book that many people can resonate with because it's got a lot of emotion. Everyone, I mean, the theme is death, life, and I would definitely recommend this one. Okay, if you're still watching the video, then thank you, and I hope you enjoyed our very strange review on The Crow. I'm gonna go and try to get some sleep. It's probably 4 in the morning. Thank you for watching, and I'm aiming to do more Halloween comic book reviews and hopefully some other like I would like to check out some Halloween themed board games for you guys. So stay tuned, and we're gonna have some fun in October. Yeah. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good night, and I'll see you in the next video.